We've got a new article in the Wall Street Journal detailing Biden's cognitive slowdown. This obviously being reacted to very harshly by the White House. Some interesting reporter stuff that I can go through because it was reported in hostile territory. All right, here we go. Whap, bap, bap. When President Biden met with congressional leaders in the West Wing in January to negotiate Ukraine funding, he spoke so softly at times that participants struggled to hear him, according to 5 people familiar with the meeting. He read from notes to make obvious points, paused for extended periods, and sometimes closed his eyes for so long some in the room wondered whether he had tuned out. I'm just going to take a wild guess and say that landing on the phrase tuned out was probably a fight amidst editors and writers. Because I'm going to take a wild guess and say that the nomenclature that you would mostly refer to that behavior as is falling asleep. But falling asleep was apparently too harsh, right? And so you say the softer version of tuned out. Hot lead. Hot lead here. Hot lead in the Journal. Hot lead, summer in the city. Let me take a look. Whose byline is on this? Annie Linsky and Shaban Hughes. In a February one-on-one in the Oval Office with House Speaker Mike Johnson, the president said a recent policy change by his administration jeopardizes some big energy projects was just a study, according to 6 people told at the time about what Johnson said happened. Johnson worried that the president's memory had slipped about the details of his own policy. And last year, Biden was negotiating with House Republicans to lift the debt ceiling. His demeanor and command of the details seemed to shift from one day to the next, according to then House Speaker Kevin McCarthy and 2 others familiar with the talks. On some days, he had loose and spontaneous exchanges with Republicans. On others, he mumbled and appeared to rely on notes. I used to meet with the vice president, go to his house, McCarthy said in an interview. He's not the same person. So let's just take, I'm going to define all of this as the lead of the story. If in the parlance of newspaper writing, the lead is the thing that you bring people in that is immediately followed with what is called a nut graph. Yes, it's funny to say. A nut graph essentially gives you, at its best, the entire roadmap of the story. So everything you're going to read with like 1-sentence lines, and then the rest of the story is you laying out what you have summarized in your nut graph. This is all journalism 101, right? This is newspaper writing 101. So let's assume that we are referring to this, and look, this is a big story. You're going to piss off the White House, so you want to make sure that you are justified in what you write. This is the lead. Now, I have said a lot on this stream and others that I am not a gigantic fan of the who farted and where stories. Who farted and where stories I would define as Donald Trump. I'm going to use Trump, but let's use Biden as an example. Joe Biden says that he'd never close the border ever in a million years, but and then it's according to 5 people who are familiar with it. It's a strain of story that relies almost entirely on unnamed sources, and I don't like them. So, is this a who farted and where story? What we are looking at are 3 different time and place examples of Joe Biden having a senior moment, right? And I'm going to point out specifically why they led with these in this order. They lead with the bipartisan one first, and they don't specifically say bipartisan, but we're going to assume that it's bipartisan because of some of the sourcing that you're going to find a little bit later in the story. But met with congressional leaders to negotiate a Ukraine funding deal. You're going to assume that that's people from both sides of the aisle. Then you get a Mike Johnson one-on-one that doesn't have Mike Johnson immediately on the record. And then you have a Kevin McCarthy one-on-one, and you do have Kevin McCarthy on the record. So if this kind of elevates beyond a who farted and where story for me and lands more in the realm of a trend story. So we are pointing out immediately 3 different times with 3 different groups of people that similar thing happened. And this I find to be very important, at the very least, you got somebody on the record. Now, we're dealing with politics. It's an election year. You're never going to please everybody. And immediately the first thing that anybody on the Democratic side is going to say is, yes, but it's Kevin McCarthy. He's an embittered partisan. And of course, he wants Donald Trump to win because he's going to be Donald Trump's chief of staff or whatever. And I would say that's fair. It is fair to say that. But I would rather have somebody put their name on the record. I would rather, with the understanding that no matter what, this is going to look political. From the journalist perspective and from the paper's perspective, I would prefer that that be the case. All right, we continue. The 81-year-old Biden is the oldest person to hold the presidency. His age and cognitive fitness have become major issues in his campaign for the second term, both in the minds of voters and in attacks on him by Republicans. The White House and top aides say he remains a sharp and vigorous leader. So, look at this. They're making sure the White House doesn't, as soon as they get through their lead, this is the nut graph, and you don't get more than a sentence out of the nut graph without putting the White House's perspective. I'm for this, by the way, because you're going hard at the old man. So, at least let them have their say. Some who've worked with him, however, including Democrats and some who have known him back to his time as vice president, described the president who appears to have appears slower now, someone who has both good moments and bad ones. For much of his career, Biden enjoyed a reputation on Capitol Hill for being a master negotiator of legislative deals, known for detailed knowledge of the issues and insights into the other side's motivations and needs, and for hitting his stride when the pressure was on. Over the past year, though, Republicans in control of the House, that reputation has diminished. White House officials dismissed many of the accounts from those who have met with the president or been briefed on these meetings and motivated by partisan politics. Now, this is really funny because, look, the Journal knows, again, they are shitting on Biden. This is not going to go over well with the White House. They probably faced a lot of pressure in even reporting this kind of story. So they give the White House their rebuttal before even most of the evidence that they're going to lay out is even in the story. they just go ahead and say, like, all right, well, give me your paragraph. Here we go. Congressional Republicans, foreign leaders, and nonpartisan national security experts have made clear in their own words that President Biden is a savvy and effective leader who has a deep record of legislative accomplishments, said White House spokesperson Andrew Bates. Now, in 2024, most Republicans are making false claims as a political tactic that flatly contradicts previous statements made by themselves and their colleagues. I don't like this because it doesn't really tackle any of the things that are going to be said in this article, which are Joe Biden used to be sharp and now he is dull. So if you have said a thing in the past and now you have changed, well, it doesn't really change much now, does it? He was fast, now slow. Was sharp, now dull. Sun up, sun down. This is the worry. This is you have articulated the worry of the American voter, even the American Biden voter. Was good, now bad. Is that true? Was fresh, now rotten. Is he declining? And for you to make the big deal, oh, it contradicts previous statements. Yeah. This article is based on more than, all right, so this, I want you to see all these words. Here, 425 words. 425 words before the actual journalist gets to defend their reporting. 425 words. Nut graph, White House rebuttal before it even starts. And then we get to the reporters defending the reporting before we even begin. This article is based on interviews with more than 45 people over several months. The interviews were with Republicans and Democrats who either participated in meetings with Biden or were briefed on them contemporaneously, including administration officials and other Democrats who found no fault in the president's handling of the meetings. Most of those who said Biden performed poorly were Republicans, but some Democrats said that he showed his age in several of the exchanges. And this is where you get a little bit of the clause. This is where this is where you see that the reporters had a fucking hard time reporting this story, because this is a bit of a like, oh, okay, really? You want to play like this? The White House kept close tabs on some of the Wall Street Journal's interviews with the Democratic lawmakers. After the offices of several Democrats shared with the White House either a recording of an interview or details about what was asked, some of the lawmakers spoke to the Journal a second time and once again emphasized Biden's strengths. They just, said that I should give you a call back, Representative Gregory Meeks, a New York Democrat, said, referring to the White House. Bates, the White House spokesman, said, "We thought it was important that all perspectives be represented," to correct what he said were false and politically motivated claims. So it's a little peek behind the curtain to say, boy, did the White House fight us on this story. The White House did not like that we spoke to Democrats. They yelled at the Democrats we spoke to, and then they forced the Democrats we spoke to call us back and say, yeah, but also he's great. He's young. He's virile. And so after that, you get a little bit of the balance. You want to balance it out. So, they were a little mean to the White House here and the way that they harassed the reporters and harassed the sources. And now we go to a little bit of the context. Former President Donald Trump, who at 77 is 3.5 years younger than Biden, has also faced questions about his mental acuity. Indeed, both candidates have captured repeatedly on camera, slipping up on facts or otherwise botching their public remarks, providing a steady stream of fodder for both Democrats and Republicans to attack the mental capacity of the opposing candidate. During Biden's January meeting on Ukraine, the president laid out a forceful case for providing aid. All right, so here we go. Now we're actually into it. So let's do this again. How many words? 462 words before we actually get to the meat of this story. During Biden's January meeting on Ukraine, the president laid out a forceful case for providing aid, according to administration officials and some participants, who added that using notes in such meeting is common practice. White House spokesman Bates denied that Biden had misspoken during his one-on-one exchange with Johnson in February about energy policy. Administration aides familiar with last year's debt ceiling negotiations said Biden was effective and that his role was to be above the fray and to provide detailed instructions behind the scenes. They said McCarthy privately told administration officials at the time that he was impressed with Biden's performance and that McCarthy suggested as much in public remarks, which, if we have seen anything over the last few months, taking Kevin McCarthy at his word is something that you should do at your own peril. They said the passage of both Ukraine funding and debt ceiling increase without major concessions to Republicans shows he succeeded. Some who attended the meetings attributed off-key moments to his speech impediment and his tendency to be long-winded. So we're assuming those are the aides, because that's the Biden administration's, that's their thing, which maybe we'll get back to the point where they really rely on this idea that he has a stutter. I find that to be insulting because homie didn't have a stutter for the vast majority of his career. It's not like he's new to the scene. Okay? It's not like he's new. He's a well-known quantity. Those who expressed concern about Biden said the behavior they saw suggested an unevenness, not the caricature of an addled leader that some political opponents draw. The White House said the president's doctors have found him fit to serve and that his recent annual physical showed no need for a cognitive test. Members of the Biden administration offered numerous examples of other situations they said showed the president was sharp and engaged, including long hours in the Situation Room in April and after Iran's missile attack on Israel, late nights on the phone with lawmakers from his White House residence. Voter perception about the mental acuity of both candidates are being sharply, partly by footage and news coverage of other public slips. On May 20th, during a Rose Garden event celebrating Jewish American Heritage Month, Biden said that one of the U.S. hostages held in Gaza was a guest at the White House event before correcting himself. One day earlier, at a campaign event in Detroit, he indicated that he was vice president during the COVID-19 pandemic, which started 3 years after he left. And in one of the numerous flubs, in a single speech, he prompted the White House to make corrections to the official transcript. In January, so now we're just doing the greatest hits of Joe screwing up in public. In January, he mixed up two of his Hispanic cabinet secretaries, Alejandro Mayorkas and Xavier Becerra. During a February fundraiser in New York, he recounted speaking to German Chancellor Helmut Kohl, who died in 2017 at the 2021 Group of Seven meeting the same month. At a different fundraiser, he said that during the 2021 G7 summit, he had spoken to former French President Francois Mitterrand, who died in 96. Trump, for his part, has mixed up Nikki Haley, a Republican presidential primary opponent, and House Speaker Emeritus Nancy Pelosi, the California Democrat, during a January speech. At a rally in Virginia in March, he referred to Biden as Barack Obama when commenting on Russian leader Vladimir Putin's opinion of U.S. leadership. And during his criminal trial in New York in May, he closed his eyes for extended periods. So that's probably, you want to know what? I'll bet you that might have been a fight inside the newsroom. It's like, well, if we say that Biden slept during this meeting, do we have to say that Trump slept during the trial? You didn't have eyes on Trump during the trial. A lot of people that said that were, it's like Maggie Haberman or more Democratic operatives. So that's probably why he tuned out and didn't fall asleep. After the January 6, 2021 attack on the Capitol, there was so much concern over Trump's mental state that some of his cabinet officials discussed whether there should be a greater check on his power, and one considered invoking the 25th Amendment. A Trump spokesman said he is sharp as a tack. Can somebody find there's like the meme, it's like a video meme where there's like a fast motion version of a dude pointing out a thing on a chart as he's like explaining a thing, but it's like going in like 5 times speed to show how long he's explaining it. And then on the other side, it's just like the slow motion of the Giga Chad guy. This was the Biden White House paragraph. Congressional Republicans, foreign leaders, and nonpartisan national security efforts have made further off that Biden is a savvy and effective leader. And the Trump campaign, sharp as a tack. 4 words. Ha! He's smart. Don't worry about that guy. He's fine. Sharp as a tack. Which I don't know how much that says about confidence or anything. It certainly says that, the Trump campaign is not worried about people being worried about Donald Trump's mental acuity in the same way that the Biden campaign is obviously, and they should be. It'd be political malpractice if they were not focused on the fact that Americans think he's too damn old. In March, a Wall Street Journal survey of voters in 7 battleground states, just 28% said Biden was better suited physically and mentally to be president. 48% picked Trump. Questions about Biden's age were amplified in February when special counsel Robert K. Hur, who interviewed him for roughly 5 hours over 2 days in October during the probe into his handling of classified documents, reported that Biden's memory had been significantly limited. Biden responded in a news conference, "I know what the hell I'm doing." Explaining meme gif. Yeah. There's one where it's like a side-by-side with the Giga Chad guy. But that's what it reminded me of just like a lot of words. And then sharp as a tack. Americans have minimal opportunities to see Biden in unscripted moments. By the end of April, he had given fewer interviews and press conferences than any of his recent predecessors, according to data collected by Martha Joint Kumar, an emeritus professor at Towson University. His last wide-ranging town hall-style meeting with an independent news outlet was October 2021. He's had fewer small meetings with lawmakers as his term has gone on, visitor logs show. During his first year in office, even with pandemic restrictions, he held more than 36 meetings for fewer than 20 lawmakers in the West Wing. That number fell to 24 in his second year and about a dozen in his third. Bates, a White House spokesman, said the new Republican-controlled House presented fewer opportunities for a Democratic president to push major legislation. All right. So really, even that, all that, I mean, look at where we are in this story. We are at the beginning. So all of that was throat clearing. Now we are getting into the actual reporting. Remember when I said that we were getting into the actual reporting? No, we're not. So here we go. This is deep lore. The Ukraine running out of munitions. The White House called together top lawmakers to discuss what it would take to get congressional funding, along with the scope of border security changes demanded by Republicans. The president moved so slowly around the cabinet room to greet the nearly 24 congressional leaders that it took 10 minutes for the meeting to begin. That's a bit of a cheap shot because Biden's a fucking gadfly. Like Biden back in the 90s would probably do the same thing. It would just be more words spoken. Biden started the meeting reading from notes to make broad points about the need to give money to Ukraine, which struck several participants as odd, given that the lawmakers present already generally agreed that more funds were needed. Some attendees had trouble hearing him. Biden deferred so frequently to other lawmakers that much of the conversation didn't include him. Some people who attended the meeting recalled, when directions came directly to him, he would turn to staffers. "You couldn't be there and not feel uncomfortable," said one person who attended. "I'll just say that." Gene Sperling, a top Biden aide who also worked for former Presidents Bill Clinton and Obama, said that it's standard practice for presidents to read from cards in serious policy meetings with lawmakers. Casey Redmond, a National Security Council official who attended, said Biden turned to his aides only twice, deferring one question to National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan and another to Director of National Intelligence Avril Haines. House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, the New York Democrat who attended, said Biden was incredibly strong, forceful, and decisive. The White House provided similar statements from two top officials who attended: Shalonda Young, Director of Office Management and Budget, and Deputy National Security Advisor John Feiner. Bates, the spokesman, said that no one in the room said anything at the time about having trouble hearing Biden. What you see on TV is what you get, Senator James E. Risch, Idaho Republican who attended the meeting but shared only his general impressions of the meeting with Biden. These people who keep talking about what a dynamo he is behind closed doors, they need to get him out from behind closed doors because I didn't see it. Others who attended said that Biden's demeanor and level of engagement fluctuated, and he seemed lively and engaged at some points. When the topic moved to an immigration overhaul, Johnson, the House Speaker, offered Biden a list of a dozen of executive actions he could undo to improve border security. Biden, rather than responding to Johnson's suggestions, chided him, according to people at the meeting. I've forgotten more about immigration than you'll ever know. Bates, the White House spokesman, characterized Biden's retort as a lighthearted comment about his long experience with immigration policy. Bates and Johnson later publicly described the meeting positively and that the meeting put Congress on the trajectory to pass Ukraine aid. Meeks, the New York Democrat, said he didn't come away with the meeting worried about Biden's acuity. I found him to be the same Joe Biden I've known since Congress, who was elected in 1998. I'll tell you what, so far, and I only read the first few paragraphs of this before I came on live. So far, look, they're going to get beat up on this. The White House is going to get beat up on this because the Journal decided to actually put some muscle behind it. But cheers to them so far. They did what you should do in a comms department when you have a bad story like this, and that's flood the zone with on-the-record people. So if somebody is saying Biden was falling asleep and could barely audible and he was barely present at the meeting, then you make sure that you get 7 people on the record to say that's not what happened. He was strong. He was doing push-ups. He did calisthenics. He was doing Hindu squats in the center of the office. Whatever you need to do, make sure that there's just more of your quotes than their quotes. So far, so good. Biden and Johnson, February 27, 2024. After a late February meeting of House and Senate leaders about military assistance to Ukraine, Biden pulled aside Johnson for a chat, funding and what it would take to bring the matter to a House vote. Johnson brought up a new administration energy policy that halts future permits for shipping liquid natural gas to many countries, including in Europe. While the climate, economic, and national security impact to those exports are studied, the policy fanned concern that the ban would scuttle new projects and ultimately force U.S. allies to import more from energy-rich adversaries like Russia. The policy also affects several multi-billion-dollar projects in Johnson's home state of Louisiana by denying them, for now, key export permits. Mr. President, you're helping Vladimir Putin, Johnson told the president, according to one person briefed with the exchange. Biden said that wasn't true, and that the new policy was only a study, according to several people familiar with Johnson's versions of what happened. Johnson was dismayed that Biden appeared to have forgotten the details of his own policy. Okay. So this is a slightly bigger one because it demonstrates two things. Number one, Biden's not home, right? Number two, that this was a moment where a real thing had happened. Biden, this is the highest level of government where you would have these kinds of conversations, and he's not familiar with what his own policy was. That's not great. That's a harder one to hand wave away. So here comes the cleanup crew. Bates, the White House spokesman, said that those who have heard Johnson's versions are repeating a false account. He said that the study is part of the new policy and that the pause doesn't affect current exports. Administration officials said that Biden was attempting to signal to Johnson that the policy wouldn't have the detrimental effects he was worried about. No new Energy Department permits for exporting liquid natural gas have been issued since the pause was announced. So this is the Wall Street Journal saying, Biden was actually just telling him that it wouldn't have a negative effect. And the Journal is saying, it had a negative effect. Caleb Campbell here in the chat, is it possible that this was pushed by his staff and sold to him as just a test, tinfoil hat theory? No, I don't believe that this is pushed by the Biden staff at all. I think what if anything, what you see here is a very concerted effort by the White House comms team to make sure that their voice was heard on this. I mean, there's essentially two ways that you can go with stories like this. If you are the White House, you can either say, this is a political hit job, we don't want our hands anywhere near it, or you can say, it's totally wrong, and I'll give you a million different sources that say it's totally wrong. The White House chose option B. And so you can very much see that the White House had a detailed list of what issues were being talked about in the story. They obviously went back and forth with the reporters because you have a lot of point-by-point rebuttals from the White House and other sources that are saying, well, I was in the meeting, I didn't see that. So this is something that I'm going to guess that this is a story that the Wall Street Journal says, hey, we need a is Biden slowing down cognitively story. Let's actually put reporting into it. Let's not leave this to the commentariat class. Let's not leave it to the meme lords. Let's actually put some work into it. So go talk to whoever you can. And actually, let's take a look. What are these beats? Annie Linsky is the White House reporter, and Siobhan Hughes covers Congress. So that means that there was some back and my guess. I don't know shit, right? So this is me just reading the tea leaves from a barely educated perspective as somebody who has been around the construction of some of these articles. It starts with an editor, and then you start to work through some stuff. So maybe the aides off the record are like, hey, yeah, by the way, there was this really awkward meeting. And so then you find other stuff with the congressional stuff, or maybe it goes the other way. Maybe there's a lot of people on the congressional side that are like, holy crap, dude, this guy is like out of it. He is out to lunch. I will say this. In D.C., a lot of this stuff is talked about a lot more freely. There's a lot of like, holy crap. I mean, I told you guys, it took me 5 seconds sitting in a bar in the middle of the day a couple years ago to have a Democratic lobbyist come in and call Biden the sick king of Prussia. All right, we continue. Johnson declined to be interviewed for this article. Taylor Hawley, a spokesman for Johnson, said the speaker stands by the account and Biden appeared to misunderstand the policy. All right, so they didn't get Johnson. I mean, you got Johnson because there's people inside of his office that are talking, but Johnson doesn't want his name up. Although his office certainly wanted to make clear that, yeah, no, Biden screwed it up. Biden didn't know what his own policy was. Senior White House officials disputed assertions that Biden doesn't understand his policies or appears disengaged, saying that he's been sharp when dealing with crises and pushing through his legislative priorities. In mid-April, during the pressure-packed hours when Iran was attacking Israel, Biden stayed in the Situation Room tracking Iran's missiles and drones as they were shot down while strategizing with senior aides about what to say to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu when the attack ended. Biden sought de-escalation, telling Netanyahu on that call that he didn't need major military response to the unprecedented attack, using military shorthand that refers to tit-for-tat responses as turns. The official said Biden told the Israeli leader, do not do a turn 3. When the call ended, Biden told his national security team that he suspected Israel would still respond in some way, but that his argument was likely to minimize the response. He was right. Israel hit a military target in central Iran, a limited strike. So again, I'm going to assume this is color that you're getting from the White House. Debt ceiling. When Biden was vice president, he played a central role in negotiations with the Republicans over increasing the debt ceiling, striking a deal when the country was on the precipice of default. According to some Republicans involved in similar negotiations in May 2023, his level of engagement was uneven. He would ramble, said McCarthy, who led the Republican sides of the talk. He always has cards. He couldn't negotiate another way. So here we go. This is the on the record source. This is Kevin McCarthy, a well-known person, deposed House leader, or House Speaker, and House Leader, I guess. who is going to talk about his experience with the faltering, shambling mound known as Joe Biden. Spin Dash, genuine question. When they say legislative, push through legislation, what legislation are they referring to? I would assume the bipartisan gun stuff, the infrastructure stuff, and the inflation. The bill formerly known as the Inflation Reduction Act and now known as the greatest green energy legislation in a generation. Used to be an Inflation Reduction Act. Now it's the greatest green energy bill in a generation. What a glow up. When the deal was coming together, McCarthy wasn't as openly critical of the president. He said he enjoyed meeting with him and praised Biden's staff. I thought the team was very professional, very smart, very tough at the same time, he told reporters in May. For the final phase of the talks, McCarthy assigned fellow Republican House members Garrett Graves of Louisiana and Patrick McHenry of North Carolina to work with White House aides on the nitty-gritty issues. At times, the White House team would defer items, saying Biden needed to make the final call. But Biden wouldn't discuss those points in detail when he had check-in talks with McCarthy, according to people familiar with the conversation. He kept the calls general, expressing optimism about working things out. Administration officials say that Biden was employing an oft-used negotiating tactic of staying above the fray. McCarthy, one of the officials said, was doing the same thing. On May 21st of last year, 11 days away from possible default, Biden called McCarthy from Air Force One on his way back from a summit meeting in Japan to discuss the negotiations. On that phone call, he was more with it than any other time. Biden told stories about the foreign leaders at the conference and referenced how the debt ceiling talks could impact various members of Congress politically, according to people familiar with it. When McCarthy and other lawmakers met with the president the next day, McCarthy said Biden lacked the spontaneity he'd projected on the plane. He's going back to all the old stuff that had been done a long time ago. And he was shocked when I said, no, Mr. President, we talked about that meetings ago. We're done with that. Administration officials said that during the negotiation, it's not unusual for the White House to reassert its original positions on various points, sometimes to show Democrats that the president is still pushing for their priorities. The president spoke so softly and with such little enunciation that attendees said they struggled to hear what he was saying. People familiar with the meeting said he told the same story more than once about his experience with the DuPont company during his time as a Delaware senator. Administration officials who were at the meeting said they saw nothing unusual about Biden's demeanor, and they didn't struggle to hear this or recall him repeating a story. Bates, the White House spokesman, said that Biden didn't rely overly on notes and that he thought his long career, he was frequently repeated with anecdotes in meetings. When the Republican negotiators came out of the meeting, McCarthy was upbeat, telling reporters that the tone of the White House meeting was better than any we've had. As Republicans and negotiators drive around from the White House, they called a colleague to update him on the talks. According to someone familiar with the call, one topic of discussion, the president and his acuity. So there we go. That is the Wall Street Journal's Biden is slowing down story. It is making the rounds here today. What do you guys think? Hit job? Well reported? What is your guys' take on that? What do you think? What do you think? My two biggest takeaways are this. Number one, I'm glad they got Kevin McCarthy on the record, because I think when you're doing stories like this, you should get somebody on the record. This is a pretty damning charge. This is dancing around the topic of saying that Joe Biden, the president of the United States, is unfit for office. And if you're going to do that, I'm glad they got somebody on the record. Yes, you can say it's a partisan person. Still, that is a bar that modern DC journalism has, I think, not been interested in clearing with stories like this in the past. So I'm glad they got one. Cheers to the White House comms team. I think that they did their level-headed best to flood the zone with other voices on it. But ultimately, it's like, all right, what did it tell us that we didn't know before? I'd say the media is luckily starting to show Democrats a problem they want to go away. The issue is that the problem may not go away without losing the election.